beatdown Fists of Vengeance is a game that never really got a fair shake. A lot of people simply passed it by due to the negative reviews and never gave it a second look. Don't get me wrong, it does have issues, and there's quite a few if I'm being honest, but at its core it offers a compelling adventure if you're willing to look past some of the more dubious choices it makes. Now it sees you playing as one of 5 cartel members who are thrown onto the streets where your own gang sets a trap for you. Backstabbed and framed for a crime you didn't commit, you set out for revenge against your previous family, with the goal being to create your own empire and overthrow the gang lords of the town. The gameplay is made up of several aspects. It's primarily a beat 'em up, but it does pack a few surprises that help it differentiate itself from others. As you would expect, you've got a generous amount of moves to beat on enemies with, as well as access to a ton of weapons that make each encounter that more exciting. The combat itself is split up into 2 different styles. Firstly, you've got the brawler fights, which take place on the street, and secondly, you've got one-on-ones, and this is where things get interesting, as during each of them you're presented with several options that allow the player to either recruit, interrogate, or rob the enemy. It's a nice touch that adds a bit of risk to each encounter, as only certain members will pop up at specific times, but the main hook of the game will see you collecting cash and spending it to customize your character with an insane amount of items. And this is where beatdown really comes into its own. As I mentioned at the start of this section, the game is not without its faults, but don't let these faults stop you from playing it, as although it might not be as polished as it could be, there is still a ton to love about beatdown, and if you've already played most of the other beat 'em ups on the PS2 to death, this will be right up your street. When it comes to first-person shooters, the PlayStation 2 played host to some incredible games, with the likes of Black and Time Splitters to name a couple, but one that has largely been forgotten has to be Red Faction. The story revolves around the horrible conditions of an off-planet mining colony that sees the workers revolting and fighting for their own survival. The campaign takes place across a huge variety of levels, regardless of the somewhat claustrophobic nature of the facility. This is mainly due to one of the core mechanics of Red Faction, known as the Geomod system. This gives the player the opportunity to shoot holes in and blow up much of the terrain in the game. Explosive weapons such as rocket launchers and grenades all leave holes at their impact locations, but what is even better is the strategic options it makes available. In both facets of the game there are secret rooms filled with the best weapons and extra health. Just keep blasting and you're bound to find something. You can make your own sniper hole, or create tunnels between 2 sections of the map. The actual weapons available in Red Faction are a fairly good bunch. Most of them are your bog standard fare like the sniper rifle, the rocket launcher, and the assortment of machine guns aren't anything you haven't seen before. When it comes to replay value, there are 4 different difficulty settings to choose from. The first one is perfect for initial playthroughs, with the 4th being mind-numbingly difficult, but not to the point of complete despair. To top it off, there's a pretty generous multiplayer mode on offer that helps prolong the life of the game even further, with plenty of options and modes of play to get stuck into with friends. When it comes to first-person shooters, it is often the little things that make the difference between the good ones and the bad ones. Red Faction has enough of these little things to make it an absolute winner. The enemy AI, gorgeous graphics, and especially the Geomod are all good reasons to make you consider Red Faction as your next game to play. If there is one word that could sum up Primal, it would have to be ambition. There are so many ideas that the game brings to the table which just never fully get off the ground running. First off, it's glitchy, there's not much challenge, and the core gameplay could have been implemented a bit better, but that all fades into insignificance when you actually get into it. Somehow, the story, the near photo-realistic visuals, the incredible, detailed, atmospheric environments, and the well-paced mix of puzzles and combat make for an extremely entertaining experience. It all starts off with you assuming the role of Jen, a pretty badass rock chick, and Scree, a small stone gargoyle, with the aim of the adventure being to save the realm of Oblivion from, well, Oblivion. There's obviously more to it than just that. In fact, the game has 4 different stories running alongside the main one, and you work your way around them using the different abilities of the 2 characters, mainly to solve puzzles that enable you to progress further. Then there's the combat. Basically, it's pretty, well, basic, but a lot of fun. Button bashing will get you through most of it, but there is a simple combo system which is surprisingly satisfying to play with for those that want to inject a bit of style into the proceedings. Along the way, Jen will acquire the ability to transform into demons, with each of them having different abilities that aid in both combat and puzzle solving, and once you acquire a new form, you can transform into them at any time, which again makes for some great puzzles where you have to make full use of every form to progress. Unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and lollipops. I don't want to dwell too much on the glitches though, as they don't don't spoil it that much, and I feel the real technical and creative achievement lies in the stunning visuals and level design, but they do prevent a very good game from being even greater. If you can look past its shortcomings, Primal would make a welcome addition to your collection. The first thing that will strike many about Gungrave is its interesting use of cel shading, and the way it creates an almost anime-esque aesthetic that really contributes to the overall vibe and tone of the experience. The main character Grave is an odd-looking ass-kicker from beyond, who is brought back into service when a little girl, Mickey, delivers a pair of guns called the Cerberus to Grave's doctor friend. Apparently, a group known as the Syndicate are running amok in the city, and there needs to be a little carnage and chaos to get things back to normal. It's up to Grave, his pair of guns with never-ending ammunition, and the massive coffin magic bag of weaponry on his back to slap the Syndicate back into their place. When it comes to gameplay, Grave's walk is slow, but not to the point of annoyance, and most of the time if you're going to walk, it's because you're taking out tons of enemies. But if you do want to cover more ground, you can run, dodge, jump and slide in order to avoid obstacles and incoming attacks as well. But that's not the only abilities Grave has. As you take out enemies, you'll soon get access to one of his special attacks, otherwise known as demolition shots. Throughout the game, there's several to unlock, and once you fill your beat meter, you can unleash them upon the unsuspecting enemies. It can be difficult trying to manage everything that comes your way, but therein lies half the fun of Gungrave. It's frantic, it's not going to hold your hand, and as a result you'll slowly build in skill throughout your playtime, to the point where you'll feel unstoppable once you've got a full grasp of everything it allows you to do. It's all about doing the most over-the-top things to silence your enemies, and look cool whilst doing so. So much so that the game even ranks you at the end of each stage with how stylish you were beating the crap out of everyone. Visually, as I mentioned earlier, it has a sort of anime look and feel which works beautifully. The minor characters are not very detailed, but the character modelling of Grave is absolutely fantastic. The special effects are handled expertly, with gun muzzles flashing, cartridges discharging, bullets leaving holes in walls, and anything else that you can hit. Unfortunately though, the game is quite short and doesn't offer that much in the way of replay value, but for the time it does last, it provides one hell of a blast. Operation Winback is an action-adventure that originally released way back in 1999 on the N64. It wasn't until 2 years later that it received a port for the PlayStation 2 and saw us once again playing as Jean-Luc, a member of a government agency known as SCAT, whose aim it is to take back control of a stolen weapon. I'll be honest with you, the story is completely forgettable, but what isn't is the outstanding gameplay that Winback provides. Long before Gears of War popularized the cover shooter, Winback introduced a system that, although crude by today's standard, offered a really engaging way to take on enemies. Now the controls are a little bit awkward at first, but you'll soon get used to them. They don't run as smooth on the PlayStation 2 as they did on the N64, but are still very much manageable. You can roll behind objects, blow stuff up, set C4 charges, pop around corners and much more. Although you can't shoot and walk or run at the same time, you'll find that you don't really need to, as there's usually enough cover to hide behind. When it's time to go on the offensive, there's not many weapons you get to use, with only 3 becoming available throughout the runtime. One way the game does compensate for this lack of variety though is the ability to use in-game turrets and rockets that help spice up the gunplay, especially when you're surrounded by enemies and are running low on ammo. The enemies themselves are actually quite intelligent, with them reacting to your movements and not pulling their punches when you're spotted. When it comes to longevity, Winback offers several modes such as a bot mode that allows the player to get used to the mechanics in play without the stress of worrying about failing. The next is a trial mode that sets certain conditions to adapt to on the fly, and finally the versus mode that sees up to 28 characters being playable to deck it out against a friend with. But what makes it really interesting is that in the main adventure there are several key moments that decide whether or not you'll reach either the best, good or bad ending. Because of this, Winback offers a nice amount of replay value, as each of the endings are worth seeing if you find yourself invested in the story. Coupling this with the extra modes, and what you get is a pretty robust package that any PS2 owner would be happy to own. Ring of Red is a turn-based strategy game in the style of Front Mission 3 and Final Fantasy Tactics. It's based around the idea that Japan didn't surrender after the atomic bombs were dropped back in World War II. During this time, armoured fighting walkers or AFWs were in development, and pretty soon every major country on the globe was in the business of constructing them. Now there are 4 basic types of these AFWs. You've got a low armoured short-range unit, a trusty all-rounder, a devastating long-ranged four-legged tank, and the close combat anti-FAW. Each of these types work best at a certain range, which is basically the number of squares away from the enemy you are. Choosing which machine to carry out the task is crucial to overcoming the enemy. Making your selection brings up a scope with a number, representing accuracy that slowly moves up to 100% from whatever your starting accuracy was. There are many different factors that affect this number, so taking special care whilst aiming is vital to landing a shot. Visually, Ring of Red isn't too bad, but it's certainly not up to par with other games on the system like Armored Core and Zone of the Enders, and the textures are just kind of plain, though they are acceptable. The particle effects on the other hand are gorgeous, as are the explosions and weapon fire, which are all wonderfully done. Although the battle mode is where the graphics come to life, the grid is actually visually pleasing as well with its design, which makes it easy to tell what's going on at a glance. Overall, the graphics aren't mind-blowing, but they get the job done and allow each battle to become a tense and engaging affair that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you never got around to checking it out for yourself, Ring of Red would make a great addition to anyone's PS2 library. The PS2 is well known for its incredible lineup of racing games. With the likes of Gran Turismo and Ridge Racer, there were plenty of options when it came to choosing your next racer, but one that often got overlooked had to be Road Trip Adventure. As part of the legendary Japanese Korakyu racing series, which melds racing and RPG elements together, Road Trip Adventure was perhaps one of the most refreshing titles to come out on the PS2. It threw out the need to worry about realism, and instead focused on an experience that was built to be fun, but also offer a serious amount of depth for those willing to dig deep enough. The meat and potatoes of the game lie in its adventure mode, which is where the racing and RPG genres combine into an unforgettable adventure for the player. The core goal of this mode revolves around you becoming a Grade A driver to compete in the World Grand Prix competition, in which the winner will become the president. Along the way, you'll meet other cars in every single one of the game's cities, with them all being based around real-life locations. Aside from meeting cars, the other key aspect to the adventure mode involves going from town to town and finding new races to compete in. Now in my eyes, it's the RPG elements that really help sell Road Trip Adventure. You can change your wheels, the body, the paint and the engine. The best thing about these changes is that they all result in a noticeable effect once out on the road, from better speed and handling to individual NPCs complementing your appearance. Overall, Road Trip Adventure is a fantastic racing game that, while not perfect, adds something to the genre. The gameplay was innovative, the controls are solid, the graphics won't offend anyone, and the sound, well, the sound may very well offend you, but the thing that matters most is gameplay, and that's something that this game has got by the bucket load. Jade Cocoon was a pretty underrated RPG on the PlayStation 1 that never really managed to make as much of an impact as it deserved to do. Fast forward a few years after its release and a sequel eventually found its way to the PlayStation 2, which looked like a completely different game, with a much more childish approach to its design. To be honest, it put me off at first, but after actually sitting down and playing the game through, I'm glad I did, as it's just as good, if not better in some ways than what came before it. The story makes a pretty good backdrop for the game and manages to hold interest while not interfering with the gameplay, and as far as the gameplay itself is concerned, Jade Cocoon 2 delivers in spades. Anybody who's played a monster breeder game before, be it Pokemon or Monster Rancher, probably has a basic idea of what they're getting into. It shares much in common with the games I've mentioned. First and foremost, you wander around vast areas collecting bigger and better monsters to do your bidding. Remarkably though, Jade Cocoon 2 makes a few tiny changes to make the system even better. The variety of different monsters you can collect is staggering. The game is populated by hundreds of different monsters, and anyone you see in the game can be added to your combat ring and used in battle. While each monster is hatched with only one basic attack, it can be merged with literally any other monster in the game, allowing for a massive number of combinations, as well as being able to learn new attacks that it can use on other positions in the combat ring. I'm not gonna lie, the combat system can be a bit tricky, but it does go on to become one of the most compelling aspects of the game, and is bound to satisfy fans of the genre who love getting stuck into the intricacies that RPGs offer. If you've exhausted the usual suspects on the PS2 and fancy trying something new, Jade Cocoon 2 would make a solid choice. Oni is one of those games that you're either gonna absolutely love or hate. Personally, I think it's pretty solid and has a lot going for it, but it does take a bit of time to really discover what makes it tick. The sort of anime-esque aesthetic really sets the tone and will no doubt draw you into the world it presents. But when it comes to gameplay, this is where Oni can be quite divisive. The controls are awkward to say the least, and most people who hate this game just can't get past it. The D-pad is used for forward and backward movement and strafing, while the right analog stick is used to look around. You can change your attack, item use, activate commands in the setup, but the movement keys are unchangeable. This is unbelievably frustrating at first, but if you keep with it, the controls will eventually start to work for you. Mai possesses a string of combos and special attacks that make short work of the enemies that litter each environment. But it's not only hand to hand, she's also pretty hot when it comes to weapons. But it's just a shame that the controls let this aspect of the gameplay down as well. The shooting is difficult, mainly because the sights on all of the guns are not conducive to the analog controller itself. The laser scope on your pistol is very exact, but the jerky, clunky way that analog moves it around makes it pretty much worthless. You'll be much better off just pointing in the general direction of the bad guys and just emptying your clip like a madman. Oni will somehow manage to keep you engaged. Maybe it's the level of depth that's actually on offer, with Mai being able to learn new moves and combos throughout the game, which really come in handy when taking on some of the more challenging opponents. All in all, the strategy involved in order to complete all of the missions, and the combination of fighting and shooting all come together in a pretty good fashion. The game is fun to play once you get past the controls, and that's all that really matters when it comes down to it. If it passed you by back in the day, now is the perfect time to try it out for yourself. Straight up, I am a huge fan of Ghost in the Shell, so my love of this game might be a bit biased to be fair. It's based on the anime of the same name, and it sees the player taking on the role of either a woman known as Kusanagi or her partner Batou, both members of Section 9, a public security organization which specializes in counter-terrorism and cyber warfare. You're called in to assist a military investigation where weapons scheduled for scrapping have ended up on the black market. The narrative soon unfolds to reveal a much bigger and broader story that will satisfy longtime fans of the series, as well as intrigue newcomers alike. The distinctly futuristic Japan is your playground, and the high-tech gadgetry contained inside are your toys. When it comes to gameplay, it's essentially a third-person action game that at first can be a bit tricky to get used to. Aiming your weapon is difficult, and to make matters worse, there's no auto-aim feature as well, which results in it becoming a bit of a chore at first. Although there is thankfully a way to reduce the sensitivity, which does partially alleviate the issue. Now you've got a whole host of options when it comes to taking on each and every obstacle the game throws your way. First off, there's melee combat, which has huge damage potential. It provides a valuable strategy when dealing with close enemies, with a handy dodge making zigzagging runs possible when you're not sheltered behind the sanctuary of cover. But that's not the only trick Kusanagi has got up her sleeve. Thanks to cybernetic implants, she's capable of hacking into enemies and even equipment like turrets to control them, which offer a ton of ways to get yourself out of a tight spot. And then it ends all too soon. Ghost in the Shell will rock you with its non-stop action, but the fantastic conclusion comes so abruptly that it can be quite deflating. The action within may not last for as long as it should, but it will grab you by the throat and not let go. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 4 as that will be coming up soon. So don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new uploads. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date, as well as join our growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters: Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Quinn, Dio, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon to gain access to exclusive videos and giveaways, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.